I'm very curious about how you see the relationship between the competitiveness that has characterized your athletic career and this calling to higher service.
To sum it up, it's the fight for people that can't fight for themselves. And competitiveness is not the problem. It's where you steer it.
So you saw a lot of people who were suffering, and you knew that that was wrong.
I see the boy laying on the cot. I see his legs. I see they're on backwards. And so I get a little bit emotional, but I hold it back. And Sherwin is the name of the boy who looks at me and said, I've been told my whole life that I'm not impressive.
Let's go back. I don't understand how you developed your athletic ability in relation to team sports and were homeschooled. How did that come about?
Can I back it up even to my birth? There was issues with the entire pregnancy. The placenta wasn't properly attached. She had amoeba dysentery. She went into a coma. The doctor who had finally helped my mom give birth, he looked at my parents and said, I don't know how your baby boy is alive, and God's got a special plan for your life. Do you know what happens when you hear that over and over and over again? You start to believe it.
So what did it mean to believe that when you were little? I had the opportunity today to talk to one of the world's premier athletes, Tim Tebow, and we had a very interesting conversation. And I would say the crux of the matter is the relationship between masculinity, masculine competitiveness, masculine striving for excellence, and virtue, all things considered. Our culture is set up now in large part on the presupposition that competition and that masculine striving for dominance and excellence is in itself a form of patriarchal oppressiveness. And that's wrong. And it's not only wrong, it's wrong in a deadly way because it demoralizes young men. And when that happens, well, then young women don't have anybody to partner with. And so that's just a complete bloody catastrophe. And Tebow is a very interesting case because he's an excellent athlete and in multiple different athletic domains. And he's extremely competitive and averse to failure. But at the same time, he's a very good man, and he's figured out how to take that competitive striving and that desire for excellence and that hatred of losing and to transmute it into a form of high-level motivation aimed at not only the good of winning, let's say in local competitions like athletic competitions, but the aim of winning at the higher order purposes of life. And so a lot of our conversation revolved around putting masculinity in its proper place so that everything beneficial about it can flourish at the psychological, relationship, and social levels. And so this is a crucially important conversation, and I think we got to the core of the matter. Now, that was embedded in a broader framework because Tim started out as a stellar athlete and then a stellar team player, but he's expanded his endeavors into the business and philanthropic realm. And so we were able to have an abstract discussion about the relationship between competitiveness, let's say, and virtue, but we're able to ground that in something very solid, which is his transition from athlete to businessman and philanthropist. And so, well, these are important issues to sort out. And if you want to develop your clarity of mind in relationship to such things, and if you want to become a good, what would you say, a good motivator for your own purposes and a good father to your own sons and a good leader to the people who are around you, then these are issues that you have to be straight about. And this discussion can help you figure out why you should do that and how you could go about it. So join us for that. So your team sent me a video detailing out the operations of your foundation, and I thought we might as well start by talking about that. I was struck by its breadth. And so I'm very curious about, well, I'd like to know more about the foundation. I'd like to know where it's distributed, what it's doing, and also how you set it up and keep an eye on it. So tell me about the foundation, Tim Tebow Foundation.
Well, I think I'd probably go back to the first time I was inspired that I really felt like I was called to start a foundation or be involved. And I wouldn't even say I even knew it was a foundation, but that's when I was 15 years old and I was on a mission trip to the Philippines. And it's a country that I love very much. I was actually born there, lived the first 5 years of my life there, and then went back with my dad and a group of people to the Philippines. And on this trip, we got to do a lot of amazing things, but one of the islands I got to visit was a very remote island. You know, Philippines is made up of over 7,200 islands, and many of them are extremely remote. And I got to go to an extremely remote island, and on this island, we get to share our faith and encourage the people. But one of the things that radically impacted my life was I had the privilege of meeting a boy who was born with his feet on backwards. And because he was born this way, he was treated as less than, insignificant, and cursed. And he was a throwaway to the people there. And my heart broke for him. And I knew he wasn't a throwaway to God, but I just felt like God was pricking my heart saying, okay, then what are you going to do about it? If you know he's not a throwaway to me, and you know he's not cursed, you know that he's actually fearfully and wonderfully made, you know that he's one of one, he's loved, what are you going to do about it? And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that looked like in a practical. I just knew going down that mountain that day and leaving that island that I was somehow supposed to fight for boys and girls, to fight for people that couldn't fight for themselves. And I'm only, maybe finishing my sophomore year of high school, and I'm trying to figure that out. What does that look like? And I get through high school and college, and we were involved in different ministries and orphan care. And my dad's a missionary, and so I got to grow up on the mission field and seeing a lot of that. But the first thing I did when I graduated from the University of Florida was start the foundation with the mission statement to bring faith, hope, and love to those needing a brighter day in their darkest hour of need. When I wrote that, all I did was think about that boy, where he was in his life and what he needed to bring faith, hope, and love to someone in their darkest hour of need. To sum it up, it's to fight for people that can't fight for themselves. And when we presented this and when we launched the foundation, there were some people that wanted to be supportive, like, oh, that's a good heart, thank you, good intentions. But there were a lot of people that said, it's too broad. You won't be successful. You can't do all the things we were talking about because it started in orphan care and then a hospital and special needs and wish granting organization. And that's kind of how it started. And so many people, I even remember at our first press conference to say, this is our heart and our starting, and this is what we're calling the foundation. This is our mission statement. And one of the first questions, but don't you think it's too broad?
So that was a strategy objection.
I think so. And my response to it was, this is what I feel like we're called to do. And every door that God opens that he wants us to run down, I don't want to say, oh no, because we want to be successful, we're only going to go down this. No, we want to get to as many hurting people as possible. And one of the ways that I like to share it is I knew when I got to that island and I met that boy that I love sports. I loved the game. I loved baseball, basketball, and football. I loved competing. I loved winning. I hated losing even more. I was nth degree competitive. And I had the chance to be somewhat successful at sports and win some championships and even MVPs sometimes. And one of the things that I really felt like was pricked on my heart, and I don't even know, Dr. Peterson, if I could have explained it verbally then, as much as it was just in my heart, but now the way I'd explain it was, I was trying to be my best and every now and then being the best, and you could say chasing an MVP of most valuable player, but God pricked my heart that day and said, I have a more important MVP for you to chase. It's not the most valuable player, it's the most vulnerable people, because they're worth far more than some other MVP. And
you know, there's a weird paradox in your story, because, well, many of them, but I'm very curious about why this boy in particular. Now, you know, so what you just said, there's a bunch of paradoxical elements to it, because you're obviously very competitive. You really like winning. You said you hate losing even more.
Yes, sir.
And that's actually an attitude that many people think is at odds with an attitude of compassion, for example, right? Because there's a huge movement in our culture to demonize competitive sports because they're oppressive and aggressive. And you were spectacularly successful as an athlete, and you describe yourself as very competitive. And yet you also were highly motivated to start this foundation. And the boy that pricked your conscience, like you said, you were on your father's missionary ventures in many places. And yet it was this particular boy, and you could think of him in a way as exactly the opposite of you, because literally his feet were on backwards. And I'm curious about why you think it was him in particular. I mean, you were in the Philippines and other places, so you saw a lot of people who were suffering. Like, why do you think it was that it was his existence per se that stood out for you? And then the other thing I'm curious about in that regard is, you said that as far as the people in his village were concerned, he was a throwaway, and you knew that that was wrong. And so the first question might be, why do you think that it was obvious to the people in the village that he was a throwaway, so to speak? And why do you think that grated against you? Like, what's the difference in perspective there? So, well, that's a bunch of different questions. So
they're great questions. I would start with my opinion on probably why they believed he was cursed and less than, is because that's what they had been told for a long time. That's what they had believed, that because he was born this way, he was cursed.
Right.
And it was a belief that he was less than. And actually, to tell more of the story, when we got there and we gathered all the people to share with them, to share our faith, it was my opportunity to share. And I think it was probably around 1,200 people was total in the whole village. And I actually saw 3 boys leaving. And you got to understand, this is weird because the Filipinos love Americans. I mean, they were fighting to get as close to us as possible. They're so excited. They have visitors. Many would tell us that we're the first visitors that they had ever seen in their entire life.
Right.
So they're so excited. And I see these 3 middle school age boys leaving. And it just caught my eye. Like, why? People they're literally as close to us as possible as we're sharing. And I finished and I just had it on my heart. I want to go see about these 3 boys. Why did they leave? And to make a long story short, I walked around the corner and one of the boys comes walking up to me and he grabs me by 2 of my fingers and I try to say hey to him. He says nothing. He just grabs me and he pulls me back to this tiny little bamboo hut, and he walks in there, and then I get on my knees and I crawl in there and I see the other 2 boys, and one of them's sitting there holding a boy's hand like this, and the other one's laying on the cot, and it looks like everything's fine. But then I see the boy laying on the cot. I see his legs. I see they're on backwards. And it was really the first time I had ever seen anything like this that close and personal. And so I get a little bit emotional, but I hold it back, and I'm sitting there and I'm talking with these 3 boys, and I'm sharing why we're there and God's heart and love for them. And at the whole time, I just had to ask, though. I don't know why. I just felt like I had to ask, why did you leave? When everybody was so excited to see the Americans? Why did you leave? And Sherwin is the name of the boy with his feet on backward, and looks at me and said, because our principal really wants to make a good impression and impress the Americans. And I've been told my whole life that I'm not impressive. And I just knew that I was here now for a reason.
Right, so he had to be hidden from you.
Yes.
Right, because it would bring the village into disgrace.
Yes.
Right.
And
see, there's a very interesting, it's not surprising that had such an impact on you, because the attitude that you're describing that would lead that boy to be isolated, that is, you could say in a way that's the standard human attitude towards abnormality. And I would say that was particularly true in the pre-Christian world, is that if someone was deformed or abnormal in any way, that the conclusion would be that they were cursed.
Yes.
And that they were less than.
Yes.
And the evidence would be the fact of their disability.
Yes.
Right. And a huge part of the impact of the Christian Revolution was that the last will be first, right? And that the most appropriate target of true power is service to the people who are hurt most. It's a complete redefinition of what constitutes sovereignty. That's an unbelievably revolutionary proposition, right? That the king of everything should serve those who are most in need.
Yes.
And that the symbol of true sovereignty was the ability to engage in that service. And so then you had a direct encounter with someone who was the opposite of what you were celebrated for, really, right? That's a good way of thinking about it. And these boys that were with him, were they his friends? Like, why?
They were. And I would say Sherwin radically impacted my life, but I also want to mention these two boys radically impacted my life too, because they weren't told to leave. They left because they were not going to leave Sherwin. And
so he didn't get to come to the group
so he
meeting.
didn't get to come.
And
he was shunned. He
Right.
was there and they said, you need to leave so you don't disgrace everyone.
I see.
And they left too with him. And so then when I'm with them, our team comes and they'd been looking for me. They found me in this bamboo hut and they're like, Timmy, we got to go. And I'm like, no, I'm never leaving. They're like, yes, you are. Let's go. And so as I'm getting ready to walk out, Sherwin says with such hesitation, but would you carry me? And I'm thinking like, dude, of course, like, yes, like no problem. So I pick him up. When I pick him up, one of his friends grabs a hand and the other grabs one of his feet and they hold on to him. They're so close. It made such a mark on me. And we walk out of the bamboo hut and there was some of our team and then some of the Filipinos. And when I step outside carrying him, you could literally hear an audible gasp. And at first I'm thinking, what, like looking around. But then I realized they were gasping because I was carrying the cursed boy.
Yeah, right.
And that's how they were still hearing, even though they had also just heard the good news of the gospel that God loves everyone, that every single one is fearfully and wonderfully made. And I'm carrying him through some of the crowd and you could see some of the people like almost watch them contemplating, wait a second, is he cursed? Or is he loved and valuable as the Americans were telling us?
Right.
And you see, some don't know, but then finally one of the elders of the village, as we're walking by, walks up and puts her hand on his shoulder as to say, sort of, you're now welcome here. And then another one did it, another one, but still some would back off, like, we're not still sure.
Right.
And then team saying, we got to go. So we walk over to the Jeep and I set Sherwin down. I put his arms around his two friends and I get on my knees and I pray with these three boys and I tell them, I don't know when I'm going to get to see you again, if I'm going to get to see you again in the Philippines or if you'll get to see me in America. But I totally believe one day I'll be able to see you in heaven. And Sherwin looks at me and says, Kuya Timmy, which means brother. I can't wait to run with you in heaven. And it's a boy who's never walked a day in his life. But somehow the first thought he had was, I can't wait to run with you in heaven.
So what became of Sherwin? How did that?
I don't know. I so wish we would have been able to get back to that island and that village and meet him. But I do know now that many boys and girls in the Philippines, because of our amazing team and partners, that there's a hospital that cares for boys and girls just like him, that we bring them in from all over the country. And many times they're wheeled in or carried in, but they get to walk out and they get to be loved and cared for along the way. And I'm so grateful because that happened because of Sherwin.
Right.
Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, supporting everyone from established brands to entrepreneurs just starting their journey. You can create your professional storefront effortlessly with Shopify's extensive library of customizable templates designed to reflect your brand's unique identity. Boost your productivity with Shopify's AI-powered tools that craft compelling products, descriptions, engaging headlines, and even enhance your product's photography, all with just a few clicks. Plus, you can market your business like a pro without hiring a team. Easily develop and launch targeted email campaigns and social media content that reaches customers wherever they spend their time, online or offline. If that's not enough, Shopify offers expert guidance on every aspect of commerce, from inventory management to international shipping logistics to seamless return processing. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.com/JBP. Go to shopify.com/JBP. Again, that's shopify.com/JBP.
All right. So now you also talked about the other paradoxical element here was this issue of competition. And so you said a couple of things. You said that you were very motivated to become the best football player, the MVP. And you said you were also called to serve the most vulnerable people. So that's kind of a nice analog. But I'm very curious about how you see the relationship between the competitiveness that has characterized your athletic career and this calling to higher service. Because as I pointed out, people often believe that